You've had a long day. You hunted a mammoth, walked 60 miles through frozen terrain, and cooked a meal of wild ducks by the fire. And then you reached for something, a plant, and you burned it and breathed it in. 12,300 years. That number completely changed what scientists thought they knew about smoking. And it raised a question that's far more interesting than anyone expected. When and why did humans start smoking? The answer takes us across continents, through ancient empires, and deep into the human mind itself. Before we go back in time, let's understand what we're actually talking about. Tobacco is a plant, Nicotiana tabacum. It grows naturally in the Americas. Its leaves contain nicotine, a powerful stimulant that affects the brain almost immediately. For thousands of years, humans didn't smoke it in cigarettes. They burned it, chewed it, inhaled it in pipes, and used it in ceremonies. Here's why nicotine is so powerful. The moment it enters the body, it travels to the brain and triggers a release of dopamine, the pleasure chemical. Suddenly you feel calmer, more focused, less tired. For a hunter-gatherer who had just spent an entire day hunting and walking, that feeling was extraordinary and deeply, deeply addictive. The story of the world's oldest smoking evidence begins in one of the most unlikely places on Earth, a vast, chalky white desert in Utah known as the Great Salt Lake Desert. For 20 years, archaeologist Duran Duke had been combing this landscape, relying on wind erosion and luck to uncover its secrets. And then, at a site called Wishbone, something remarkable turned up. Buried inside the remnants of an ancient fireplace were 4 tiny seeds, charred and blackened by heat. When scientists analyzed them, But the seeds weren't alone. Around them were thousands of broken waterfowl bones, evidence of a massive duck feast. There was a sharp spear point and several other types of seeds linked to ancient human consumption. This wasn't a random campfire. This was a deliberate camp, and tobacco was part of what these people brought with them. Imagine the scene. A small family, perhaps 10 to 15 people, setting up camp near a marshy green lake in what is now northwestern Utah. They'd walked 60 miles to reach this place, drawn by the promise of big game, mammoths, ancient camels, and abundant waterfowl. They built a fire, cooked their meal, and as night fell, they reached for their tobacco. Imagine the scene. A small family, perhaps 10 to 15 people, setting up camp near a marshy green lake in what is now northwestern Utah. They'd walked 60 miles to reach this place, drawn by the promise of big game, mammoths, ancient camels, and abundant waterfowl. They built a fire, cooked their meal, and as night fell, they reached for their tobacco. Before the wishbone discovery, the oldest evidence of tobacco use was a set of ceramic smoking pipes found in Alabama, dating back about 3,300 years, with nicotine residue still inside them. That was the record. Then the wishbone seeds arrived and pushed everything back by 9,000 years. Nearly an entire history of human civilization added in one discovery. Exactly how these ancient people used the tobacco at Wishbone isn't fully clear. The seeds were burned in the fire, but whether they inhaled the smoke, placed leaves behind their lips, or used it in some other way is still debated. What we do know is this: they brought it deliberately, they burned it deliberately, and they returned to this site repeatedly. Here's another clue that tells us this was intentional. Wild tobacco does not grow in the marshy area where the wishbone hearth was built. These people carried it with them from somewhere else. They planned for it, just like a modern person who packs cigarettes before a camping trip. Now here's what makes this even more remarkable. The first humans arrived in the Americas somewhere between 13,000 and 16,000 years ago, crossing from Asia over a land bridge that existed during the Ice Age. The wishbone tobacco users lived just a few thousand years after that first arrival, which means humans discovered tobacco almost immediately after reaching the Americas. Researchers believe that as these first Americans spread across the continent, they quickly identified tobacco for its powerful effects. As archaeologist Duran Duke put it, these people were the ultimate botanists. They explored every plant, tested every leaf, and discovered tobacco's intoxicating properties almost as soon as they encountered it. And this early relationship with tobacco may have had an even bigger impact. Some scientists believe that humans' deep familiarity with tobacco, learning its growth cycles, caring for it, harvesting it, helped pave the way for agriculture itself. The urge to have a reliable supply of tobacco may have pushed early humans toward farming. The world's first crop might have been a drug plant. Fast forward thousands of years. As humans spread across the Americas and began building civilizations, tobacco moved with them. The ancient Maya, one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history, incorporated tobacco deeply into their culture. For them, it was not a casual habit. It was sacred. Mayan mythology described tobacco as a gift from their gods. To smoke it was to connect with the divine. Mayan priests used tobacco smoke to communicate with the spirit world, to heal the sick, and to bless important ceremonies. The smoke itself was seen as a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the gods. We don't just know this from stories. Archaeologists have found ancient Mayan carvings, stone reliefs, and ceramic figures depicting people smoking tobacco in pipes. These carvings date back to at least the 10th century, and possibly much earlier. The evidence is carved into stone. Tobacco was central to Mayan life. In Aztec mythology, the goddess Cihuacoatl had a body made entirely of tobacco. Not symbolically, literally. Tobacco was so sacred that it was used to represent the divine body of a goddess. Even today, certain Celtal Maya communities still sacrifice 13 calabashes of tobacco at New Year's ceremonies. The tradition has survived for thousands of years. The Aztecs, who built one of the most powerful empires in the Americas, held tobacco in equally high regard. Their priests wore tobacco gourds around their necks as symbols of divine power. The act of smoking was inseparable from religious ceremony, and their mythology ran even deeper. But perhaps the most dramatic use of tobacco came from shamans, spiritual leaders found in cultures across the Americas. Shamans used tobacco to enter altered states of consciousness, deep trances in which they believed they could travel to other worlds, communicate with spirits, and receive knowledge unavailable to ordinary humans. When the first European explorers reached the Americas, they were completely unprepared for what they witnessed. Reports from conquistadors describe native priests smoking themselves into such extreme states of intoxication that Europeans were convinced they were witnessing supernatural possession. Many historians believe these ceremonies involved more than just tobacco. Researchers believe that ancient shamans often mixed tobacco with other psychoactive plants, mushrooms, peyote cactus, ayahuasca vines, to intensify its effects. This was not recreational. This was ritualized, controlled, and deeply intentional. The shaman was seen as a specialist, someone who had mastered the dangerous art of communicating with other worlds. Across North America, tobacco held a central place in indigenous cultures. The ceremonial pipe, sometimes called the peace pipe, was used to mark agreements, seal alliances, honor the dead, and open important conversations. Sharing a pipe was not a casual gesture. It was a sacred act, a commitment, a form of prayer.
Tobacco was also used medicinally across dozens of ancient cultures. It was applied to wounds to prevent infection, blown over sick people to drive away illness, used to treat toothaches, headaches, and snake bites. Modern science has confirmed that nicotine does have genuine antimicrobial and pain-reducing properties. Ancient healers knew this through thousands of years of experimentation. Now, let's travel east to Central Asia, around 440 BC. A nomadic people called the Scythians, fierce warriors who dominated the steppes between the Black Sea and China, had their own smoking tradition. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus described their rituals in detail.
Herodotus wrote, "The Scythians throw cannabis onto red-hot stones. The Scyths, delighted, shout for joy." This is the earliest written account of cannabis use as an intoxicant anywhere in the world. And according to Herodotus, they used it in ritual purification ceremonies, particularly after funerals.
In 2019, archaeologists made a stunning discovery in western China. At a 2,500-year-old cemetery called Jersenkal, they found 10 wooden braziers, small portable burners. Chemical analysis revealed extremely high levels of THC, the psychoactive compound in cannabis, far higher than wild cannabis plants produce naturally.
This was a remarkable finding. The cannabis at the Jersenkal site was significantly more potent than wild varieties, which means ancient people were already selectively breeding cannabis for higher THC content. 2,500 years ago, they were engineering drugs, deliberately, thousands of years before modern science. At the Jersenkal cemetery, cannabis was burned in enclosed spaces during burial ceremonies. Researchers believe the mourners inhaled the smoke intentionally to achieve an altered state that would help them communicate with the spirit of the deceased. Cannabis was not a drug to these people. It was a telephone to the afterlife. And it wasn't just tobacco and cannabis. Ancient humans discovered and used a remarkable range of psychoactive plants. Opium, derived from the poppy plant, was used in ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece as far back as 3400 BC. Egyptian medical texts list opium as a treatment for pain. Homer's Odyssey references a drink mixed with opium to induce forgetfulness. Even burning incense, practiced in ancient Egypt, Babylon, Israel, Greece, and Rome, may have served a similar purpose. Some researchers have found evidence that certain incense mixtures burned in ancient temples contained psychoactive compounds. The worshippers weren't just smelling nice smoke. They may have been getting mildly intoxicated as part of the religious experience. In ancient India, cannabis, called bhang, has been used for at least 3,000 years in religious contexts. The god Shiva is said to have introduced cannabis to humanity. Hindu holy men called sadhus have smoked cannabis for centuries as part of their devotional practice, believing it brings them closer to the divine. Here is one of the most fascinating questions in all of human history. Why did virtually every ancient culture, independently, across every continent, discover and use psychoactive plants? The Americas, Asia, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, all of them, all with their own traditions, all finding ways to alter consciousness. The answer may lie in something fundamental about human nature itself. Humans are uniquely curious creatures. We explore, we experiment. We ask, what happens if I eat this? And when something alters our perception, relieves pain, induces calm, creates visions, we remember it, we share it, we ritualize it. The use of psychoactive plants may be one of the oldest, truly universal human behaviors. For thousands of years, tobacco remained in the Americas. Then, in 1492, Christopher Columbus arrived. When he landed, Native Americans offered him dried tobacco leaves as a gift. Columbus and his crew were likely the first Europeans to ever encounter tobacco. They brought it back to Europe, and everything changed. Within decades of Columbus's voyage, tobacco had spread across Europe. By the late 1500s, it had reached Asia and Africa. By the 1600s, it was being smoked, chewed, and sniffed on every continent on Earth. What started as a sacred plant used by ancient hunter-gatherers in Utah had become the world's most widely traded agricultural commodity. Tobacco didn't just spread, it fueled empires. In colonial America, tobacco became Virginia's most successful cash crop. It funded wars, it built fortunes, it drove the expansion of slavery, as plantation owners needed enormous workforces to meet the skyrocketing demand. A plant first used in a sacred ceremony became the engine of one of history's darkest chapters. For most of human history, no one understood that smoking caused disease. Ancient peoples used tobacco sparingly, ritually. But as cigarette machines made tobacco cheap and mass-produced, and as life expectancy increased enough for lung cancer to develop, the truth emerged. In 1929, a German doctor published the first statistical link between tobacco and cancer. It took decades for the world to accept it. Today, the global tobacco industry is worth nearly $1 trillion. One plant. Discovered by a small family beside a campfire in Utah 12,300 years ago. It went on to shape world exploration, fund colonial empires, create and destroy economies, and become one of the most powerful and deadly industries in human history. Here is the profound shift that happened somewhere between then and now. For thousands of years, tobacco was used intentionally, with ceremony, with purpose, with restraint. The shaman chose when to smoke. The ceremony dictated the context. But as tobacco became industrialized, mass-produced, chemically enhanced, aggressively marketed, it transformed from a sacred tool into a mass addiction. Modern cigarettes are not what ancient people smoked. Tobacco companies discovered that adding ammonia to cigarettes makes nicotine absorb into the bloodstream faster, making the addiction stronger. Over 600 chemicals are added to cigarettes. The ancient hunter who sat by the fire in Utah would not recognize what their sacred plant became. Interestingly, modern science is now finding genuine medicinal uses for nicotine. Research suggests it may help with Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and certain cognitive disorders. The ancient shamans who used tobacco as medicine weren't entirely wrong. The compound itself has real effects. The problem was never nicotine alone. It was the smoke, the chemicals, and the addiction. So what does 12,300 years of smoking history actually teach us? Perhaps this: humans have always sought ways to alter their consciousness, to feel more, to feel less, to connect with something beyond the ordinary. That impulse is not a moral failing. It is deeply, fundamentally human. The question has always been, can we do it wisely? Let's run through the full timeline one more time. 12,300 years ago, first known tobacco use, Utah desert. Around 6000 BC, Native Americans begin cultivating tobacco. 3,300 years ago, ceramic smoking pipes appear in Alabama. 440 BC, Herodotus records Scythian cannabis use. 2,500 years ago, high-potency cannabis in Chinese burials. 1492, Columbus brings tobacco to Europe. 1600s, global tobacco trade begins. 1929, first cancer link discovered. Today, a $1 trillion industry born from 4 charred seeds. Across 12,300 years, across every continent, across every culture, humans have been drawn to the same plants, the same altered states, the same desire to feel something different. The prehistoric family in Utah, the Mayan priest on the pyramid, the Scythian warrior in the tent, the person reaching for a cigarette this morning, all connected by the same thread.
And that is the full story of when ancient humans started smoking. If this video made you think differently about something, that's what Human Void is all about. Every week, we go deep into the strangest, most fascinating corners of human history and human nature. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I will see you in the next one.
Let's run through the full timeline one more time. 12,300 years ago, first known tobacco use, Utah desert. Around 6000 BC, Native Americans begin cultivating tobacco. 3,300 years ago, ceramic smoking pipes appear in Alabama. 440 BC, Herodotus records Scythian cannabis use. 2,500 years ago, high-potency cannabis in Chinese burials. 1492, Columbus brings tobacco to Europe. 1600s, global tobacco trade begins. 1929, first cancer link discovered. Today, a $1 trillion industry born from 4 charred seeds.